rain had been falling sideways for the last 40 miles. That kind of rain that turns your windshield into a river no matter how fast the wipers move. We were coming back from Denise's aunt's place outside of Beckley, West Virginia, and I'd already told myself twice that we should have left before dinner instead of staying for dessert, and another hour of her uncle talking about property taxes. It was past midnight. Route 19 was mostly empty. Denise had her feet tucked under her in the passenger seat, half watching her phone, half watching the road. We came around a long curve and saw the orange signs first. Road closed ahead. Detour. Follow markers. Nothing dramatic about it. They had the whole setup: barriers, reflective arrows, a digital sign flashing that the road was closed due to flooding, which made sense. The creeks through that part of the state will jump their banks twice in the same week if the rain stays heavy. The detour signs took us off the main highway and along a 2-lane state road that wound between ridges. I didn't recognize it, but that's not unusual down there. Half the roads in southern West Virginia look like someone laid them with a garden hose. Denise pulled up directions on her phone, and the route matched more or less what the detour signs were suggesting. So we followed them. After about 12 minutes, we came up on a tunnel entrance, old concrete, 2 lanes, the kind they carved through these mountains back in the 50s and 60s when the interstate system was still a set of drawings in somebody's office. There was a sign that said the tunnel was 4,600 feet, just under a mile. Yellow sodium lights, visible inside, spaced unevenly. A few of them were out. I drove in. The first thing you notice is the sound. The rain just stops. Or it doesn't stop, obviously, but the noise cuts out like someone pressed mute. Suddenly you hear your own engine and the hum of tires on wet concrete, and nothing else. The radio had been playing a country station out of Fayette County, and the signal dropped almost immediately. Just a low hiss. Denise checked her phone. No signal. The tunnel was unremarkable. Concrete walls with a slight curve, drainage channels along the base, reflective lane markers, a narrow maintenance walkway running along the right side about 18 inches wide, with a low curb separating it from the travel lane. Emergency recesses every few hundred feet. Shallow cutouts in the wall with utility panels and old fire extinguisher boxes. Some of the overhead lights worked. Some didn't. The ones that did gave off that dim orange glow that makes everything look like a photograph from the 1970s. We were maybe halfway through when Denise said, "There's a guy." I saw him a second later. On the maintenance walkway, maybe 100 feet ahead. A man. Walking in our direction of travel, so his back was to us. Dark jacket, the heavy canvas kind. Jeans. Work boots, it looked like. No reflective vest. No flashlight. Just walking at an ordinary pace along that narrow strip of concrete. I eased off the gas, and not because I was afraid of him. You see pedestrians in tunnels sometimes. Maintenance workers mostly, or somebody whose car broke down. But he didn't have any safety gear and the walkway was narrow, so I drifted toward the left lane to give him space. We passed him. I glanced over. Older man, 50, maybe 60, heavy set, gray hair, cut short. He didn't look at us. Didn't react to the headlights at all, just kept walking. Denise turned around in her seat to watch him through the rear window. After a few seconds, she turned back. "He's gone," she said. "Must have stepped into one of those little alcoves." Made sense. We kept driving. Maybe 30 seconds later, I saw someone ahead in the headlights. Same walkway, same side of the tunnel, same pace, same direction. A man in a dark canvas jacket, jeans, work boots, same build. I felt Denise sit up beside me. "Slow down," she said. I did. As we got closer, the headlights picked up a detail. On the back of his left shoulder, the jacket had a pale patch, not a logo. More like the fabric had been torn and repaired with a lighter material. Or maybe it had just worn through to a different color underneath. A rough rectangle about the size of a playing card. Denise grabbed my arm. "That's the same guy," she said. "I noticed that patch the first time. That is the same jacket." We hadn't stopped. We hadn't turned around. There were no side passages. No vehicle had come from behind us. The tunnel ran in a straight line, and we had been driving forward the entire time. "Didn't we just pass him?" she said. I didn't answer. I pressed the accelerator, and we passed him again. Neither of us looked over. Before we go back inside that tunnel, if you're the kind of person who listens to these stories at 2 a.m. with the lights off, do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment and tell us where you're listening from and what time it is. It actually makes a difference in how many people these stories reach. All right, back to the road. Story 1. 1. The man we passed twice. So we'd passed the same man twice. Same jacket, same patch on the shoulder, same walking pace. And there was no reasonable way he could have gotten ahead of us. For the next 30 seconds, neither of us said anything. I was doing maybe 45 through the tunnel, which felt too fast and too slow at the same time. The headlights carved into the dark ahead, and the walls slid past, and I kept checking the mirrors. Behind us, the tunnel was just orange-lit concrete, fading into darkness. No pedestrian, no movement. Denise was twisted in her seat, watching the rear window. "He's not behind us," she said. "Good. That doesn't make me feel better." I ran through the obvious explanations in my head. 2 different men. Same type of jacket? Maybe a work crew was down here somewhere, and they all wore the same gear. But Denise was certain about the patch. She'd noticed it the first time because she thought it looked like a bad repair job, and she has an eye for things like that. Same shape, same position, same shoulder. I told her it could have been a reflective strip that just looked similar. She said it wasn't reflective, that's why I noticed it. It was cloth. The tunnel continued. The lights were getting more inconsistent now. 2 working, 3 dark, 1 working, 4 dark. Our headlights were doing most of the job. The concrete walls were slick with condensation, and in the beams, they had a faintly green tint, like old tile in a hospital basement. Then we came around a very gradual curve and saw a wider section ahead, an emergency bay. Bigger than the recesses. This one was wide enough for a vehicle to pull off completely. And there was a vehicle in it, an older sedan, dark color, hard to tell exactly in that light. Maybe dark green or brown. A model I didn't immediately recognize. Something boxy, probably mid-80s. It was sitting in the bay with no lights on. The driver's door was slightly open, maybe 6 inches. Nobody inside. I started to slow down. "Don't stop," Denise said. "Someone might need help." "Don't stop." I don't know why I listened to her. Normally I would have pulled over. But everything about the last few minutes had shifted something in me, and her voice just bypassed my thinking and went straight to my foot on the gas. We rolled past the emergency bay at about 30 miles an hour. And there he was, standing between the sedan and the tunnel wall. Same man, same jacket, same build. But this time he wasn't walking. He was standing perfectly still, facing the wall, like he was studying something on the concrete, or like he was waiting for us to pass. Denise made a sound, not a scream, more like the sound you make when you step into cold water. As our headlights swept across him, he turned his head. There is nothing wrong with his face. No distortion, no dead stare. He looked like an ordinary man in his late 50s who had turned to see who was driving past. That's what made it worse. He looked completely real. He had looked completely real every single time. We passed the bay. I accelerated. Then the radio came back. It had been dead since we entered the tunnel, just a faint hiss on every frequency. Now, without either of us touching it, the speakers crackled and a voice came through. Male. Calm. A little rough. Like someone talking through a handheld radio, rather than a broadcast mic. 3 words. Don't stop here. Then static. Then nothing. Denise reached forward and turned the radio off. The knob clicked. The sound stopped. Neither of us said a word. We drove the rest of the tunnel in silence. It could have been another 2 minutes. It could have been 5. I genuinely don't know. The exit appeared ahead as a faint gray rectangle that slowly grew brighter. And when we came out the other side, the rain hit the windshield like a wall. And I have never been so relieved to hear rain in my life. I drove for another 20 minutes before I felt like I could talk normally. We were back on a state highway heading toward the interstate. Denise had her arms crossed and was staring straight ahead. There was a work crew, I said. It was different guys. It was the same man. In a tunnel that size, with that lighting, everything looks... It was the same man 3 times, and you know it. I did know it. I was just hoping I was wrong. We stopped at a gas station near Oak Hill, one of those 24-hour places with a subway inside that closes at 10. I went in to get coffee. The kid behind the counter was maybe 19, working the graveyard shift, watching something on his phone. I mentioned the tunnel, told him we'd come through the detour. I asked if he knew whether there was a vehicle broken down in there because we'd seen a stalled sedan in one of the emergency bays and I thought somebody should know about it. He gave me a look. Not scared. More like mild recognition. He said he'd heard a tow crew pulled something out of that tunnel a few days back. An old car. He didn't know the details, just overheard one of the tow drivers talking about it when he stopped in for gas. He thought the car had been sitting in one of those pullover bays for a while, but he wasn't sure how long. I asked what kind of car it was. He said he didn't see it himself. He just remembered the tow driver saying it was old, like really old for something that was just sitting there. I stood there for a moment. Then I bought the coffee and went back to the car. We didn't talk about it much for a few days. Then one evening, Denise was scrolling through her camera roll and stopped. She turned her phone toward me. Before we'd entered the tunnel, maybe 200 feet from the entrance, she'd taken a picture through the windshield. She'd been trying to photograph the tunnel entrance itself because she thought it looked interesting in the rain, the old concrete arch, the faded signage. She liked that kind of thing. In the picture, you could see the first 50 or 60 feet of the tunnel interior. The walkway was visible along the right wall. And in the dim orange light, far enough in that you'd miss it if you weren't looking, there was a figure, a person, on the maintenance walkway. Small in the frame, but there. On his left shoulder, if you zoomed in until the image started to grain, there was a pale mark. We didn't encounter him until several minutes after entering the tunnel. I know that. I remember the drive in. The first few hundred feet were empty, but there he is in the photograph. Denise deleted it 2 days later. I didn't ask her why. We haven't driven through that part of the state since. Story 2. He was standing in the tunnel I drive for work. Not trucking. I do territory sales for a medical supply company, so I'm on the road 3 or 4 days a week, covering most of eastern Washington and parts of Idaho and Montana. I know those roads. I know the tunnels. I know which rest stops have decent bathrooms and which ones you don't bother with after dark because the lights have been out for 6 months. This happened on a Tuesday night in late October. I was driving back from a hospital client in a small town east of Snoqualmie Pass. I'd stayed later than I planned because the purchasing manager wanted to walk through the entire catalog for the 3rd time, and by the time I got back on I-90, it was almost 11. The tunnel wasn't Snoqualmie Tunnel, that's the old rail tunnel. They converted for hiking and biking. This was a highway tunnel, farther east, on a stretch of road where the interstate cuts through a long granite ridge. 2 bores, one for each direction of travel. My side was the eastbound tube, about 3/4 of a mile long, well lit normally, 4 lanes. You drive through it 100 times and never think twice. I entered doing the speed limit. Light traffic. A semi had gone through maybe 30 seconds ahead of me, and I could see its taillights, far ahead. The tunnel was bright overhead fluorescence, white tile walls for the first section, then bare rock and concrete farther in. Everything ordinary. About halfway through, I saw a man standing on the right shoulder. He was wearing a reflective vest over a dark work shirt, hard hat. He had one hand raised, palm out, in that universal slow-down gesture. With the other hand, he was holding what looked like a handheld radio. My first thought was accident. My second thought was maintenance. Either way, you slow down when someone in safety gear tells you to. I brought the car down to about 20 and rolled my window halfway. He walked toward my door. Middle-aged, 45, maybe 50, clean-shaven. Normal-looking guy. He leaned down and said there'd been an accident about a 1/4 mile ahead. Debris in the travel lanes, and they were asking vehicles to hold position for a few minutes while a crew cleared it. Completely believable. It happens. Trucks lose cargo. Accidents scatter debris. They hold traffic inside the tunnel while they sweep the lanes. I've been through it before. I said okay, and started to put the car in park. Then I looked past him. No truck, no maintenance vehicle, no cones, no flares, no warning signs. When DOT shuts down lanes inside a tunnel, they stage equipment. There's always a truck with an arrow board at minimum, usually 2 trucks, a couple of guys in vests, cones marking the closure. Behind this man there was nothing. Just the shoulder and the tunnel wall and a maintenance recess about 40 feet back. The recess was deeper than the typical ones, more of a full bay big enough to fit a vehicle, and sitting inside it, lights off, was an SUV. Dark color. Looked like an older Suburban or Yukon. My eyes came back to the man. He was watching me. "Should only be a few minutes," he said. "Go ahead and put it in park." I didn't. I left my foot on the brake. "Where's the DOT truck?" I said. He paused, just a fraction. "It's up ahead at the accident." "Okay, so I'll pull forward and stop behind it." Another pause. "They want vehicles held back from the scene. For safety." I looked in my side mirror. A second person had come out from behind the SUV in the maintenance bay. Male, bigger than the first guy. He was moving along the shoulder toward the back of my car. Not running, walking, but deliberately. I looked back at the man at my window. His expression hadn't changed, but his hand had dropped from the slow-down position and was resting on my door, fingers curled over the edge of the window where I'd lowered it. "Ma'am, I need you to put the car in park." I took my foot off the brake, pressed the gas, and pulled away. His hand slipped off the door. In my mirror, I saw him step back into the shoulder. The second man stopped walking. I drove the rest of the tunnel at 60. There was no accident, no debris, no DOT crew. The lanes were clear all the way to the exit. The semi I'd seen enter ahead of me was already a mile up the road. When I came out of the tunnel, I drove straight to a gas station with bright lights and other cars in the lot. I parked near the pumps and sat there for about 5 minutes, engine running, doors locked. Then I watched the tunnel exit in my mirror. About 3 minutes later, the dark SUV came out. It merged onto the highway heading east. Then about a quarter mile past the tunnel, it took the first exit and disappeared. I called State Patrol. I told them what happened. They said they'd checked the tunnel. They took my information. I never heard anything after that. What I found out later, through a DOT contact I have through work, I sell supplies to some of their first aid stations, is that the maintenance bay where the SUV had been parked was gated. It had a chain link gate with a padlock that was supposed to stay secured. When they checked it afterward, the lock had been cut. Someone had cut that lock, driven the SUV into the recess, positioned it where it wouldn't be visible to approaching traffic, and waited. I think about what would have happened if I'd put the car in park. If that second man had reached my rear bumper. If I'd been sitting there, engine off, between two strangers in a tunnel with no cell service and no other cars in sight. The man at my window didn't look dangerous. He looked like a DOT worker. He sounded like one. He knew the driver's trust the vest, the hard hat, the calm voice. He knew that inside a tunnel, you can't turn around. You can't pull a U-turn. You can't see what's behind you. And if someone tells you to stop, most people will stop. He had chosen that location because it gave him every advantage and me none. If there's no truck, I don't stop. Story 3. The radio knew our names. This was the summer after I graduated. Me and my 2 buddies, Tanner and Chris, were doing a road trip through Colorado and Utah. Nothing fancy. Tanner's 2006 4Runner, a cooler in the back, 2 tents, and a loose plan to hit some national parks and whatever looked interesting along the way. We were all 24, 25, and it was that window before real jobs and real obligations closed in. We were driving through a part of western Colorado that I'm going to keep vague because I honestly can't pinpoint the tunnel on a map anymore, and I don't want to send anyone looking for it. We'd been on a state highway that climbed through a river canyon, and the road passed through a series of short tunnels. Most were maybe a few hundred feet you'd enter, the light would dip, and you'd be out the other side before you could change the station. The last tunnel was different, longer. The sign at the entrance said about 3,800 feet, so not massive, but longer than anything else on that stretch. Older bore single lane each direction, separated by a double yellow, no median barrier. You could see the headlights of oncoming traffic, though there wasn't any at that hour. It was late. Maybe 9:30, which in those canyons means full dark. The mountains cut the light off early. We entered, and the FM station we'd been listening to, some classic rock thing out of Grand Junction, immediately went to fuzz. Normal for a tunnel. Tanner was driving. Chris was in the back seat. I was riding shotgun. Chris reached forward and switched the radio off because the static was getting on his nerves. Fine. We drove in silence for maybe a minute. The tunnel was doing the usual tunnel stuff. Sodium lights, concrete walls, a slight curve to the left, that amplified hum of the engine bouncing off everything. Then the radio came on. None of us had touched it. The display lit up and static filled the speakers, and underneath the static there was a voice. Low, male, slightly clipped, like someone talking on a two-way radio. Tanner glanced at the dial. "Did you turn that on?" "No." Chris leaned forward between the seats. "Probably picked up some maintenance frequency. Happens in tunnels." That tracked. CB and maintenance radio signals can bleed into FM bands, especially in enclosed concrete spaces. I've heard truckers ghost through a car stereo on mountain highways before, so none of us were worried. We listened. The voice was choppy. Static kept eating words. "Eastbound vehicle white EM." Tanner's 4Runner was white. "3 occupants." Tanner looked at me. "They're talking about us?" "Road cameras," Chris said. "They see us enter and they log it." I bought that for about 10 more seconds. The voice said, "The one called Tanner is driving." Nobody spoke. We were in a tunnel under a few hundred feet of rock, engine humming, tires on concrete, and dead silence from all 3 of us. Chris broke it. "What did it just say?" I reached for the radio, turned it off. The knob clicked. The display went dark. "Okay," Tanner said. "That was weird." "Our phones," Chris offered. "Bluetooth. Maybe our phones are connected and it's pulling contact names somehow." Tanner's 4Runner didn't have Bluetooth. It was an 06 base model. The radio was the original unit's CD player and AM/FM. No aux input. No pairing capability. I checked my phone anyway. No signal, no active connection. Chris checked his. Same. We drove another minute in silence. The radio turned on. The display lit up. Same frequency. Same static. Same voice, slightly clearer. "Passenger door open?" I looked at my door. Closed, locked. I looked back at Chris. His door was closed. Every door shut. "What is it talking about?" I said. 30 seconds later, Tanner said he felt something wrong with the steering. A subtle vibration. A rhythmic thud from the rear passenger side. He slowed and said he wanted to check the tire. Chris opened his door before we'd fully stopped. Stepped out onto the narrow shoulder. Crouched down. Looked at the tire. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at the dark radio display. Passenger door open. The radio had said it before Chris opened his door, 30, maybe 40 seconds before. "Tire's fine," Chris said, climbing back in. "I don't see anything. Might have run over something." I told them. I said the radio had described the passenger door opening before it happened. Tanner was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was a coincidence. The transmission was about some other vehicle somewhere. "It said your name, Tanner." He didn't have a response for that. We drove. The tunnel continued. It felt longer than 3,800 feet, but I didn't check the odometer. I wish I had. The radio was still on, static. Then the voice again. "Ooh." 3 entered. A pause, static. 2 leaving. Chris said, "Turn it off." I turned it off. Pressed the knob. Felt it click. "Nobody opens a door again," Tanner said. "Nobody gets out. We drive straight through." Nobody argued. The tunnel lights behind us started going out. I watched it in the side mirror. One, then the next, then the next, like a wave of darkness rolling toward us. The lights ahead stayed on, but behind us, the tunnel was going black. Tanner pushed it to 50, 55, which felt reckless in a 2-lane tunnel, but none of us said a word about it. The exit appeared. a semicircle of deep blue night sky. We shot out of it, and Tanner didn't slow down until we were 2 miles up the road. We pulled into a closed campground parking lot that still had lights in the lot. Sat there with the engine running. 3 entered, 2 leaving, Chris said from the back seat. What was that supposed to mean? The radio was picking up garbage signals, Tanner said. We psyched ourselves out. It said your name. I know. We were all there, all 3 of us. The prediction, whatever it was, had been wrong. 3 entered, 3 left. We drove to a motel in the next town. Got 1 room with 2 beds. Chris on the floor. Nobody suggested camping. Chris found it the next morning. He'd been recording video for most of the trip, putting together a road trip edit for social media. Hours of footage he'd sort through later. He'd had his phone propped on the dashboard for part of the tunnel, then on his knee in the back seat for another stretch. He was reviewing clips, and he called me over. The clip was about 40 seconds long, recorded from the back seat. Chris's perspective, looking forward between the 2 front headrests. Through the windshield you could see tunnel walls and lights. Normal footage, a little shaky. But in the lower right corner of the frame, you could see the rear view mirror. And in the rear view mirror, you could see a dark reflection of the rear seat. For about 8 seconds, Chris scrubbed back and forth over it to make sure there was a shape in the center of the rear seat, between where Chris had been sitting on the left and the empty right side of the car. It wasn't clearly a person. It was a dark form, roughly head and shoulders, where there should have been nothing but the headrest and the rear window behind it. It was there, and then the lighting shifted as we passed under a new set of tunnel lights, and it was gone. Chris was sitting on the left side of the back seat when he recorded that. The right side was empty. There should have been nothing between him and the passenger side door. 3 entered, 2 leaving. None of us deleted the video. None of us have watched it again, either. Story 4. Maintenance only 16 years, driving commercial. Box trucks mostly. Regional delivery, restaurant supply, and cold chain pharmaceutical. I know loading docks. I know service roads. I know underground delivery infrastructure. What I'm describing happened about 2 years ago. I'm not naming the city. Large metro, mid-Atlantic, the kind with extensive underground loading networks beneath the downtown commercial district. You drive down a ramp, follow the markings, find your dock, unload, drive out. Done it hundreds of times. It's commercial infrastructure, not some secret tunnel system. Every big city has a version of it. This delivery was scheduled for 11:40 p.m. late, but not unusual for cold chain pharmaceutical. The delivery address, dock number, access instructions, everything came through dispatch the normal way. No reason to question any of it. I drove to the access point. Concrete ramp leading underground. Sign, authorized vehicles only. Gate was up. Normally you badge in or get buzzed through. This time the gate was just open. I figured the receiving crew left it up because of the late hour. That happens. Underground level. Fluorescent lights, most working. Concrete floor. Concrete ceiling. Concrete pillars with yellow painted bases. Lane markings. Dock numbers stenciled on walls. Looked like every other underground loading facility I've worked. GPS dropped out immediately. Normal for underground. No phone signal either. I navigated by dock numbers on the walls, looking for dock 14. A man stepped out from between 2 pillars on my left. Gray coveralls. Lanyard with something clipped to it. He walked toward my truck like he belonged there. I lowered my window. "You the delivery for Consolidated Medical?" he said. That was the right name. The receiving company. "Yeah, looking for 14. He shook his head. "14's backed up. Truck with mechanical issues. I'm sending you to 22, lower level, same building. I've been rerouted before. Docks go down. Not unusual." He pointed down a lane that curved left and descended. "Follow that, 22's on the right." I started driving. Then I stopped and leaned back toward the window. "What am I dropping tonight?" He looked at me. "What product?" I said. "Your delivery." He smiled. "I'm just maintenance, man. I just point trucks where they need to go." Here's what caught me. The way he'd said Consolidated Medical sounded like receiving. Someone who knows the delivery is coming and what it's for. But he didn't know the cargo. A maintenance guy directing traffic wouldn't necessarily know what's in every truck. So the answer made surface-level sense. It just didn't match the confidence of everything else he'd said. I drove down the lane he indicated anyway. Lower level, dimmer. Fewer working lights. The dock numbers were wrong. 30's down here. 36, 34, 32. No 22 anywhere. The lane dead-ended at a concrete wall with a fire exit door. I stopped the truck. Near the dead end, some kind of ventilation opening in the ceiling let in ambient light from above. My phone caught one bar. Barely enough. I called dispatch. Martin picked up. I gave him my truck number and asked him to confirm the Consolidated Medical delivery. Short hold. Then, that delivery was canceled at 8:15 tonight. Client rescheduled for Thursday. I sat with that for a second. "You should have gotten the update," Martin said. "Went out at 8:20. I never received a cancellation. What I received at 7:50 looked like a standard confirmation address, dock number, access route. Everything formatted correctly. But the cancellation that should have followed it at 8:20 never reached me. "Martin, did you send me access instructions for this facility?" "What access instructions?" "Gate codes, dock assignment, the underground route." "We don't send facility access. The client handles that on their end." "There was no client tonight. The delivery was canceled. Nobody from the receiving company should have been sending me anywhere." I turned the truck around. 9-point turn in that dead-end lane, scraped the rear bumper on a pillar. Didn't care. Heading back up, I passed a white van idling in a side lane. Lights on, just sitting there. Hadn't been there on my way down. I kept moving. Followed the exit signs. Ignored the lane markings. At the next junction, another man stepped out, different from the first, younger, same gray coveralls. He raised his hand and pointed down a descending ramp. 14's open now, he said. "Take it down this way." I drove past him. He stepped back to clear my mirror. I followed exit signs up 2 levels and came out through a loading ramp onto a different street than where I'd entered. Traffic, street lights, people on the sidewalk. I pulled the truck over, locked the doors, and sat there. The company looked into it. The original delivery instructions I received at 7:50 were formatted correctly, routing codes, timestamps. All of it matched our system. But the cancellation at 8:20 had been overridden. A second set of instructions replaced it from an origin that didn't correspond to any company server. Those false instructions included my truck number, not a generic fleet code, not a route identifier, my specific vehicle number, the one painted on the cab door. Whoever built those instructions didn't just know a delivery was scheduled. They knew which truck was assigned. They knew the vehicle, the timing, and enough about our system to make the paperwork look right. I don't know what was waiting at that dead end. I don't know what the van was for. I don't know if the two men in coveralls were working together or if one of them was actually legitimate and I just couldn't tell the difference anymore. The truck was carrying pharmaceutical product worth about $90,000 at wholesale. Somebody knew that too. Story 5. The tunnel everyone avoided. My husband and I had been visiting friends in Ohio, a couple we'd known since college, who had just bought a house outside of Steubenville. We'd spent the weekend there, done the tour, eaten too much, and started home Sunday evening instead of Monday morning because I had an early meeting and didn't want to risk the drive taking longer than expected. Our route home took us southeast through the panhandle of West Virginia and into Western Virginia. We knew the major highways. What we didn't know until we got close was that construction on one of the main routes had turned a 3-hour stretch into a 4.5-hour crawl. The GPS kept recalculating, and eventually it offered an alternate route through a series of smaller state highways that saved roughly 30 minutes. Part of the route included a tunnel. We stopped for gas at a small town I'm going to call Ridgeline. I don't think that's the real name. It might be. I've tried not to look it up since. The station was one of those older places with 2 pumps and a small store attached to a house. The kind where the cashier is also the owner and probably lives in the back rooms. A man in his 60s ran my card and I asked him about the road ahead, specifically the tunnel. I asked if it was in decent shape, whether both lanes were open, anything worth knowing. He looked at me for a moment and said, "I'd take the long way tonight if it was me." I asked why. He shrugged. People get confused in there after dark. Something about the lighting. They come out turned around, saying it took too long, saying they saw things that weren't there. I don't know what to tell you. I just go around. He wasn't performing for me. He said it the same way you tell someone the soup at a certain restaurant isn't great. Take it or leave it. I thanked him and went back to the car. My husband, Greg, was in the driver's seat. I told him what the guy said. "Confused?" Greg repeated. "In a tunnel where the only option is forward?" That's what he said. We're taking the tunnel. In fairness, the alternate route added 45 minutes, and neither of us wanted to get home after midnight. The weather was getting worse. Not rain yet, but heavy overcast. Wind pushing the trees around. That thick dark that fills mountain valleys when there's no moon. We pulled out and followed the GPS. A few miles later, we passed a small church with a gravel parking lot. An older woman was getting into her car under the one light above the church door. She looked up as we went by. I don't know why I noticed her. You notice people in small towns at night because there's almost nobody else around. The road narrowed, climbed, then descended into a cut between 2 ridges, and the tunnel entrance appeared in our headlights. Old concrete arch, maybe 30 feet wide, 2 lanes, 1 in each direction. A sign with the tunnel name, something with a B, Buckhorn or Brecken. I can't be certain anymore below that. Length 3,800 feet. About 3/4 of a mile. A few yellow bulbs above the entrance. Inside, the line of overhead lights, receding, getting smaller and dimmer. There was another car ahead of us, a station wagon. Older model, early 90s, maybe late 80s. Tan or light brown. I noticed it because one of its taillights was significantly dimmer than the other, not fully out, but weak, like the bulb was failing. It gave the rear of the car a lopsided look. The wagon entered the tunnel. We followed about 10 seconds behind. Inside, the usual transition. Road noise changed. Wind stopped. Our headlights bounced off wet concrete walls. The overhead lights were sodium yellow, some flickering, some dead. Maintenance walkway along the right side. Drainage grates in the floor. The air smelled damp and mineral. We could see the station wagon ahead. Its dim right tail light and brighter left one, moving along at maybe 35. Normal speed, normal driving. The tunnel curved gently to the left. We followed the wagon around the curve. Gone. The road ahead was empty. Wet concrete, lights, tunnel continuing straight for as far as our headlights reached. "Where did that car go?" I said. Greg frowned. "Must have been a turnoff. Maintenance bay." "I didn't see one. It's a curved section. Could have been on the inside of the bend." "Possible. A car could pull into a recess quickly if the recess was on the inside of the curve." I let it go. We drove. GPS had lost signal. Phone showed no service. Dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. Maybe 2 minutes later, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, coming up behind us, getting closer. Not aggressively, just a car traveling slightly faster than we were. I watched it close the distance. As it got nearer, I could make out the shape. Boxy, older. Station wagon, same proportions, same headlight spacing, and when it got close enough for our taillights to catch its front end, the color was visible, tan or light brown. "Greg, I see it. That's the same car." Different car. How? We watched it go into the tunnel ahead of us. There's no entrance behind us. How is it behind us? There are 2 tan station wagons in the world. The wagon settled into position about 60 feet back. Matched our speed. Didn't try to pass, just followed. I watched it in the mirror. I could see the dark shape of a driver behind the wheel, but no features. Then, a section of tunnel lights went out. Maybe 10 of them, all at once, like a breaker tripped. For about 4 seconds, the only light was our headlights and the glow of the dashboard. When the lights came back, the station wagon was gone. Empty tunnel behind us. "Turned off," Greg said, but his hands were tight on the wheel. We drove. Neither of us spoke. I was watching the odometer now. The tunnel was supposed to be 3,800 feet. We'd been inside for what felt like at least 7 or 8 minutes. At 35 miles an hour, 3,800 feet should take about a minute and a half, maybe 2 at most. Even accounting for the curve and speed changes, we should have been out long ago. The odometer showed we'd traveled over 2 miles since entering. A 3,800-foot tunnel, 2 miles driven. And the tunnel stretched ahead, unbroken. "Greg, look at the odometer." He looked, quiet for a moment. "It's been acting up." It hadn't. We'd checked it against a highway mile marker the previous week. It was accurate to within a tenth. The tunnel continued. Then I saw the emergency recess, a bay cut into the right wall with a yellow metal barrier across its entrance. The barrier was dented a deep crease in the center, like someone had backed into it. Above the barrier, on the concrete wall, someone had written something in black spray paint. Just a scrawl. And mounted on the wall beside the bay was a utility light with a shattered glass cover and a dead bulb. I noted all of it without meaning to. Dented barrier, graffiti, broken light. We drove on. 5 minutes, 6, maybe more. I stopped tracking. The tunnel was straight now. No curve. Overhead lights pulsing past in that rhythmic beat. No other cars. No exit. Then another emergency recess ahead on the right. Yellow barrier, dented, deep crease in the center, black spray paint on the wall, broken utility light with shattered glass. Greg, my voice came out even, I don't know how. Stop the car. He slowed. That's the same recess, same barrier, same damage pattern, same graffiti. He looked at it as we crawled past. He didn't argue. He didn't offer an alternative. He stared at it and then he looked back at the road. We haven't turned around, I said. No. We've been driving forward the entire time. Yes. We were passing through a section of tunnel we had already driven through, moving in the same direction, on a road that only goes one way, arriving at a place we'd already left behind. Greg accelerated, deliberately. 50 miles an hour. A figure appeared on the maintenance walkway, walking toward us this time, heading in the opposite direction. An older woman. She wore a long, dark coat, the kind that falls past the knees, sensible shoes. She walked with her head slightly down like someone leaning into weather, though there was no wind inside the tunnel. As we approached, she raised her head. She looked directly at me through the passenger window. And she spoke. The windows were closed, engine running, doing 50. But I heard her as clearly as if she were in the back seat. Not this time. Then we were past her. Did you see her? I said. Yes. Did you hear what she said? Greg looked at me. She didn't say anything, she just looked at us. He saw the woman. He didn't hear the words. I let it go. I didn't know what I would have said. Ahead, the station wagon appeared again, stopped this time. On the shoulder, angled toward the wall. Driver's door open. Weak yellow interior light on, nobody inside. Nobody on the walkway near it. Nobody visible anywhere. Greg slowed. I could feel the car decelerating. Keep going, I said. As we passed, I looked through my window into the car's interior. On the driver's seat, there was a paper road map, folded open. A circle had been drawn on it in what looked like blue ink, a ring around a section I couldn't read at speed. No symbols, no writing, just that circle. Then the tunnel lights ahead went out, not sequentially, all of them simultaneously. Everything beyond our headlights became absolute black. Greg didn't stop. He kept us at 50. Our high beams cut maybe 200 feet into the darkness and showed nothing but wet road and concrete walls continuing forward. We drove in that blackness for what felt like a long time. Then light, not tunnel light, gray light. The exit? We came out and I blinked against the brightness, which made no sense, because it had been full dark when we entered. It wasn't dawn. It was more like the thick gray of heavy cloud cover, thinning just enough to let ambient light through. But the quality of the sky had changed. The dense overcast had shifted. I looked at my phone. It had reacquired signal. The time read 11:14 p.m. I looked at the dashboard clock. 9:54 p.m., an hour and 20 minutes apart. Even if one clock had drifted slightly, even if the phone adjusted itself against a tower the instant we exited, that doesn't account for the gap. And even taking the dashboard time, 9:54, that meant we'd been inside a 3,800-foot tunnel for 7 minutes. At our speed, it should have taken less than 2. We pulled into the first open place we found, a diner, the kind that does breakfast around the clock. We went in and sat in a booth, and I ordered coffee I didn't touch. I asked the waitress how long the tunnel usually took to drive through. She said she didn't use it herself, but people said it was a couple of minutes, maybe 3 if you got stuck behind someone slow. Have you heard of anyone taking longer? I said. She gave me a look, not frightened, something closer to tired patience, like she'd been asked before. People say things about that tunnel, she said. I go around. We drove home. We didn't discuss it productively. Greg held that the odometer had malfunctioned, that the GPS and phone clocks lost sync underground, that the station wagon was two different vehicles, and the emergency recess was two different recesses that happened to share similar damage. He said these things with decreasing conviction over the weeks that followed, and eventually he stopped saying them at all. 2 months later, I was visiting my mother. I mentioned the trip. I mentioned the tunnel. I said its name. She set her coffee cup down. Your father and I drove through there, she said. When you were little? On the way to your grandmother's? I hadn't known that. We moved away from that part of the state when I was 6. She didn't say much about it. She said it was a long time ago and she didn't remember much. But that night after I'd gone to bed in my old room, she texted me a photograph. It was a snapshot. The kind you took with a disposable camera in the early 90s and got developed at a drugstore, slightly washed out. The colors had faded the way all those old prints fade. My mother was standing next to our old family car, a blue Chevy Cavalier. I barely remembered it. It would look like a roadside pullout. Trees behind her, a guardrail. The road visible over her shoulder. And parked along the shoulder, maybe 30 feet behind her, was a station wagon. Tan or light brown. Older model. The angle in the faded print made it hard to be certain, but one tail light appeared dimmer than the other. Standing beside the station wagon, not posing, more like caught mid-step, was a woman in a long dark coat. Older? Ordinary? I recognized her immediately. Not her features exactly, her shape. The way she stood, the coat, the posture. It was the woman from the maintenance walkway. But that photograph was taken 23 years before I drove through that tunnel. I called my mother the next morning. I asked about the picture. I asked about the woman, the station wagon. She remembered the car. She remembered pulling over at that spot because my father wanted to check a tire. She remembered the tunnel. What she didn't remember was taking that picture. I want to ask you something before you go. Out of the 5 stories tonight, which ones stayed with you? The ones where a person was behind it, or the ones that didn't have any explanation at all? The human threat stories are terrifying, but they follow a logic. Someone wanted something, someone planned something. You can take precautions against a plan, but the others, the man in the tunnel, the radio, the road that folds back on itself. There are no precautions for something that doesn't follow any rules you understand. If you've ever driven through a tunnel or an underground road that felt wrong to you, not dangerous, just wrong, like the distance didn't add up or the drive lasted longer than it should have, tell us about it in the comments. And if you made it to the end, consider subscribing. We'll be here next week with the lights off.